Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded, an outreach of Benedictus Psychological Services. Interested in behavioral health with a Catholic Christian perspective? Check out benedictuspsych.com. On Gospel Minded, we spend a few minutes each week talking about psychology, our emotions, behavioral health, beliefs, attitudes, thoughts, and how these things are connected to the Sunday gospel reading. I always point out that this isn't any kind of substitute for actually getting yourself to Mass or church or participating in spiritual direction or counseling or therapy if you're involved with those sort of practices. But like we know so well, things of our psychology and our mind so often go beautifully hand in hand with our spirituality. So if this is your first time at this channel, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. Either way, I hope that you'll like this video and will subscribe to my channel so that you never miss an episode of Gospel Minded or any other programming. So we're continuing along our journey in Lent. Here we are getting close to halfway through. And the gospel reading today comes from Luke. And Jesus is with the crowd, and he tells them a parable. And this is what I want to focus on, is this parable at the end. This is what it says. And he told them this parable. There once was a person who had a fig tree planted in his orchard. And when he came in search of fruit on it, but found none, he said to the gardener, "For 3 years now I have come in search of fruit on this fig tree, but have found none. So cut it down. Why should it exhaust the soil?" He said to him in reply, "Sir, leave it for this year also, and I shall cultivate the ground around it and fertilize it. It may bear fruit in the future. If not, you can cut it down." So what a very interesting parable that is featured in this gospel reading for today. Now, depending on where you're at, you may have heard a different gospel reading. Today is the start of the scrutinies. But this was the reading that we had when I was at Mass. And that parable, very, very interesting. Of course, there's a lot there to think about when we talk about our spirituality. But boy, I think this reality is relevant as well when we talk about our psychology, our behaviors, our actions, our thought process. This idea of do we protect our investment and stick with what we've been doing, or do we mix it up and try something new and cut our losses and move on? That's kind of what this parable is getting at. At least that's what I thought of it. So think of it like this. Perhaps you've got an old beater car, and you've got this old beater, and it kind of has been nickeling and diming you. You know what I'm talking about. Something goes haywire and you got to fix it. And then something else goes wrong and you got to get that repaired. And maybe you're going to a mechanic. So the question is, how long do you let that keep up before you just say, well, okay, this is enough. Time to replace the whole machine. I need a new vehicle. I think a lot of us, the default is to keep repairing, keep trying to fix, keep it running as long as we can. And that might be okay. Maybe a similar thing happens if you've ever been involved with like home repairs or had a house that you thought was like a fixer-upper. You see some of these TV shows where these folks will buy these old beat-up houses with the intention and idea of fixing it up and then flipping houses. Now, if I ever tried that, it would be a disaster. But I think something similar can happen in those sort of scenes. How much are you going to kind of put little bits into that big project like the house before it's just like, okay, this is too much. I need to hire a professional. I need to sell the whole thing. Stuff like that. Cars, houses, material things. Those are one thing. But what about other realities that we experience? Relationships with other people, perhaps occupationally, work. Like, how much time and effort are we going to put into these things? Is it time to cut the loss and start something new? So this is the thing. There's some research on this. I think too often people are trying to make things last even when they're no longer bearing fruit. So I mentioned, like with work, for example. Have you ever experienced it, or do you know people who've experienced it? They're in a job that they don't care for. They're doing the kind of work that doesn't leave them feeling fulfilled. They're doing things that they're not excited about, but they continue to do it. They keep going. Why? Well, maybe it's safe. Maybe it's steady and predictable. And maybe there's an element of that that's good. But over the long term, how long do you want to keep that up? If it's a kind of role or a kind of work that's not leaving you feeling fulfilled. Or maybe relationships with other people. I work with a lot of young people in my practice, people who are at that age where they're starting to think about relationships and dating and possible marriage. And this thing happens with relationships as well, that people will spend a fair amount of time trying to salvage relationships when there's a lot of evidence that the fruit is not going to be there. It's not going to work out the way that perhaps you would want or the way you would initially hope. And so this parable then is kind of alluding to all of this sort of stuff. This story of a person going to his orchard and saying, "Hey, the fig tree is not bearing fruit. Where are the figs? Why should I keep this tree here if it's not bearing fruit?" And the gardener says, "Let's leave it for one more year. I'm gonna take extra special care of it. I'm going to fertilize it. I'm going to try and make it better, and then we'll see if it works and it bears fruit. Great. If not," he says, "then next year you can cut it down." So when we think about these things, vehicles or homes or jobs or relationships with others, I think there are two things to think about. First of all, if we are noticing that it is not bearing fruit, or whatever it is, if your car isn't running anymore, if your house is falling down, if your relationships, whatever kind of relationship it is, or your job or role, whatever, if it's not bearing fruit, and you know what that is or what that should look like, then we need to take some extra special care and give it that try, to make sure that, hey, I want this to succeed, so I'm going to take every precaution and give it every bit of attention that it needs to try and work. So this happens with young people who date a lot. They'll talk about spending more time with one another to see if the connection improves, and maybe try and do things that they haven't done as a couple. Perhaps with a job, maybe it's trying to go back and think about why you got into this role in the first place, or why you enjoyed this kind of work initially, and trying to find that sense of purpose that you had had when you first started. So, yes, by all means, take the steps to try and make it better and make the situation better. I love that, and I think when it comes to protecting an investment of time, emotion, energy, whatever, it makes a lot of sense. We should try to protect it. But then the difficulty is, if it is not bearing fruit, can we cut it out? That parable says, the gardener says, well, if it doesn't bear the fruit next year, we'll cut it out. The research shows that when it comes time for us to make those cuts in our own life, whether it's something material, whether it's an occupation or a job, whether it's a relationship, we don't tend to make cuts very easily. And we tend to not do a very good job of it. Now, sometimes we should not, and we should continue to try and work things through and try to make things better. Absolutely. But there are some times when we've got to take that bold step to make that break, to make that cut. And boy, that can be a challenge for us. But I think when we examine the evidence, is this bearing fruit for me? Is this something that's ultimately helping me right now? If that answer isn't yes, or if that answer cannot be yes, hasn't been yes for a while, then we have to ask ourselves, why am I continuing to put this time, effort, and energy into it? To use the language of the gospel, why should it continue to exhaust the soil? And in reality, it shouldn't, and it can't. But boy, it's hard to make those breaks. But what my hope is for you as we journey throughout the rest of our Lenten season is that you evaluate in your own life, as I will in mine. What are those things? What are those places? What are those situations? Who are those people that I'm still clinging to or still holding on to, even if it's not bearing fruit, or if it's not good for me or not helpful for me in my journey to becoming a better person or to living a better Christian life? What are those things? Are there steps I can take to make it better? Are there things that I can do, or some parameters I can put in place to try and help it become fruitful? If so, then I ought to do that. If I've already done it and it continues to prove and not be fruitful, then I have to make that call whether or not this is something or someone that I really need to have in my life at this time. So that's going to be my challenge for myself, something that I would invite you to reflect on and think about as well. What is that stuff? What are those places? Who are those people? What are those things in my life that just aren't bearing fruit right now? Let's take a look at that and be grateful and thankful for the things going on that are bearing fruit and that have been good, and those ways that I have received and experienced God's grace and bounty and goodness. All good stuff to talk about. And we can keep talking about this forever and ever and ever, but I want to get you on your way. I hope that I'll see you next time here on Gospel Minded. Let's keep one another in prayer. I'll be praying for you. You please pray for me as well. And we'll see each other next time. I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. This is Gospel Minded. Take care.